Hi, and welcome to Discovering DataFlex. My name is Johan, and today we're going to talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, and that is data dictionaries. But first, I'm going to tell you a little about my background with DataFlex. I started out working in a console mode DataFlex application, and a lot of the things I needed to do already existed in the application. I just needed to do some tweaks. So there were a lot of copy and paste and then updating some variable names or doing some change to some layout or something. Then I moved to Windows, and in Windows you are not that reliant on data dictionaries. Even though they help you a lot, you can still work with the regular clear move find. And I say the clear move find because that was actually the basic way to access the data in the database. But I want to start with data dictionaries anyway, because that is more important, because you will save a lot of time and effort when using data dictionaries. And then I moved on to web, and in the web there had to be a lot of messages back and forth with the server and the browser. So you couldn't always rely on the global buffer being the value you left it in. And that caused a few issues and forced me to learn about data dictionaries in a more consistent way. And what was the problem with data dictionaries then? They are these magic creatures that solve everything for you. And I think it's just that word magic that kind of creates this illusion that you can put anything in there and they'll just figure it out and save the right stuff just the way you want it to. And that is really not the case. So in these videos, I hope that we can dive a little bit deeper and get to know the data dictionaries and their features and functionality that you have to use in order to build great applications. And today we're starting with looking at the buffers, because that is kind of the major feature in the data dictionaries. That's the basic building block that everything is wrapped around. So I think it's a good thing to understand the buffers, and that's actually one of the things that I've been struggling with to get my head around, and that's because I couldn't really figure out how to work with them using the documentation. So when I read the documentation, I looked at how to find the data, and there it said use find to retrieve data from a table and place it on the record buffer. Okay, the record buffer, that's great. And then above it you can see understanding file buffers and DDO file buffers, and that sounds exactly what we want to learn about. So I click there, and there it says when a table in a database is opened, a global file buffer is created. Okay, so a file buffer is created, but what about the record buffer that we were going to retrieve data from? Well, the file buffer, it contained the values for a record. Okay, so we have something in the file buffer, and what if we want to save the file buffer? Well, if you go to the save command, it says to save changes made to the record buffer to a database, but we want to save values that we have in the file buffer. So it gets even more confusing as you dive down into the database and try to read how these buffers work. You find the global file buffer, you get the global table buffer, and then there's a private record buffer class and a DDO file buffer and local DDO file buffers. There's a DDO buffer and a local DDO record buffer, and then there's a table buffer and a child table buffer and a child file buffer and a File.Field Buffer, and then you have your regular data dictionary DDO file values, and all of these different buffers is just creating a mess in my head, and I'm trying to figure out how are they operating together, and where is the data when I'm using the application. Is it in the file buffer or in the table buffer or the record buffer? And if I store something in the record buffer, can I read it in the file buffer? What is the context between them? Is something in the data dictionary context and something in when you're in a view or in a procedure or function? All of this gets very confusing, and there's not really a lot of documentation on each of these buffers. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. This is part of a 30-year-old naming convention clash in the programming language. And it obviously more or less only appears in the documentation. The real thing is that there are only two buffers that you need to care about. It's the global buffer and the local buffer. And every one of these buffers that has a DDO in the name is the local buffer, and the rest is referring to the global buffer. So now that we know this, the documentation is a lot easier to understand, and we can move on to describing how these two buffers interact. Let's move on to the computer.
Yeah, let's have a look at the example here that I have created, but there is a little bit of disclaimer in here because it is a web application trying to portray what's going on kind of behind the scenes of a web application. So the some of the things, like when you click a button, the web app framework is updating some stuff behind the scenes. So that's why I have these like find, request find, and then find plus set file field, because if I have those in two different buttons, the find will actually be reset with the original value before I do a set field file field value, and that will kind of did not show up as it's supposed to. So what we could do now is we could go into the global buffer, which uses table.column. And in this case, we are actually looking at the name of the item. So the data entry here is the entry item. So we're actually working with a view that's supposed to have this ID and data entry. This should represent what is in the database. This is what is in the global buffer. This is what in the local buffer. Here I can push values into the local buffer and into the global buffer, and I can update the database directly. And I can also read. So if I read from the database, I get a 0 on the ID and nothing in the value. I can read both the buffers and there's nothing in them. And if I now go in here and type a value and just set it to the database, or type a value here like test and push it to the global buffer, if I reload, yeah, you see it's been updated. But if I test here and then press save record, it will actually save this test on a row with the ID 0. And obviously we don't want that because then we have a 0 post, but that happens. And if you have values, most often you get a value that says warning, duplicate record not allowed. And if you check the database, you see you had a 0 value. That's usually because you have set the global buffer and just pressed save and you forgot to set an ID on it. So we don't want that. We want to go in here and pick like bike, for instance. And if we now read the buffer and we read the database, it has found the record in the database. It's filled up bike in the global buffer. It filled in the data dictionary in the local buffer, and it updated our entry view. If I now want to change the bike, I could say, okay, change it to 1. And I tab myself out of here. If I reread the buffer, you can see that it's been updated with 1 here, but the global buffer is still bike and the database still says bike. So we haven't saved anything. Now we can do a send save record, because if we save record, nothing will happen. You see they're still the same. So I have to send request save of the item data dictionary actually. So if I press send request save here and read the buffers, it has updated all the way through. And now I can write bike 2, and when I set the value bike 2, it will automatically update the data entry. So if I do a set changed value of a file field in the data dictionary, that's how you update the local buffer, then it will automatically make sure that that value is also pushed out to the data entry objects. I read all the buffers and it's only this one that's changed. So as usual, we need to do send request save to update all the buffers. And if I read here now, this has been saved in the database as well. Now, if I go in here and say bike 3, I can update that one. And that one is updated until someone else does something with it. And if I just click read the buffer, the database will, or the data dictionary will make sure that the global buffer has the right value. So I cannot really do that in this fashion. So that doesn't work in the interface here. But I set that to 3, and then I click save record, and then I read the buffer. So that now the buffer has been updated as well, but the data entry has not been updated. And that might also have something to do with the way that the web interface is interacting with the buffers here. So I'm not totally sure that this is how it would work if you have it in one procedure as a flow. And if I go in here and set the table to bike 4, now everything has been updated as well. And that's because I'm using this buffer in order to set this and then resetting the buffer to 3, but it's not really working the way I wanted to. But if we do go in here and try to look up, you see it says 4. So it has saved 4. And if I press request save now, it will actually save 4 because that's what's in the local buffer. I can now also say find the car, and then I do a regular find. And you can see that the table and the car has been updated. If I save record, it will somehow save record 83. And if I go here, then it's totally messed up. So I want that to be bike. We reread the buffers, we see that it's bike. So I find car, I reread this one. Yeah, okay, it says bike still. So this is still holding the value of the bike. If I do request find, you see that it will update the data entry as I do the request find, because send request find is working on the data dictionary, and it will update the data entry. And if I read the buffer, you see that everything has been updated. And the last thing I want to try is if I go in here, I find the bike again, read all the buffers. If I do a find and I try to set the file field value, so I find it and then I set this data dictionary buffer, you see that that will also update the car in the interface up here. So even if I through code is updating the local buffer, I do that here as well. But if I do it in one go here as well, it will update the data entry object. So this is kind of the some of the most basic magic that is going on in the data dictionary, that whatever you put into the data dictionary here will automatically make sure updates in the interface, and it will make sure that the database is synchronized. And that's why it's a little bit dangerous to work with a global buffer, because when you do something, there might be someone else working with the same global buffer and they might change something. And when you then have a script or something that stores a value in the global buffer, it might actually be looking at a different global buffer. So this gives you a little bit of an insight to begin with, and hopefully at least it gives an understanding how these buffers are interacting with each other and with the data entry objects, and in the end with the database as well.
So I hope that cleared up a lot of things and that you now feel more confident in how to work with the data dictionary in the sense that you understand that you have the table, you have the global buffer where you read values directly from the database, and you have the data dictionary that is maintaining the data entry object as well as the buffers below. So if you have any questions or other problems that you feel you want answers to in regards to data dictionaries, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll see if I can get some answers in the upcoming videos. I do intend to make a few videos where we dive deeper into how to working with data dictionaries. And until next time, have a wonderful week. See you then. Bye bye.